The scene is that of a nightmare. A clearly Dushtulok, a villain or a demon, is riding a white stallion. He's wearing a bracelet that has the charm of a horse. His stallion neighs menacingly, or is the menace just in my head? And a little boy wakes up traumatized. Readers, this scene from the legendary film Zanjeer is my first memory of a horse, for better or for worse. Later, growing up on a staple diet of similarly age-inappropriate Bollywood films, I began to equate horses with old-fashioned romance, spontaneous adventure, one-of-a-kind thrill. Horses intimidated me, they enthralled me, they intrigued me, but they remained in the background as a helpful prop of a larger set. In fact, look at how the horses are represented in pop culture. The horse is the sidekick of the adventurous and witty Indiana Jones. The horse is a part of the identity of the all-American cowboy. He is the vehicle of the mythological warriors of Mahabharata. He is the manifestation of the macho in the quintessential Mills and Boon's hero. He is a very substantial part of our very own Jhansi Ki Rani. The horse has been a companion, a source of pride, even an equal partner that helped heroes survive or win against all odds. And yet, the horse has somehow always been reduced to a prop. This was my belief, till I came across this incredible book, the one we are discussing today, called The Tale of the Horse, A History of India on Horseback. And my perspective on horses changed forever. Good evening, everyone. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome all of you to yet another interactive book event by VLF, brought to you by Elvish Raj Environment Private Limited, Calderis and SMS. My name is Aditi, and I'm glad that all of us could make it here today without this scorching heat killing us or at least melting us. We are very lucky indeed to have with us the author of this book, Dr. Yashaswini Chandra, with us today. Before that, we also have our friendly neighborhood author, Sandhya Deshpande, more on her soon, discussing her book with us. I'm sure this would be an unprecedented experience for all of us. Amazing authors and an amazing turnout. This evening ahead seems very promising. And on that note, allow me to invite the VLF Secretary, Mr. Sachin Jahagirdar, to address our readers and kick off the event. Let's have a round of applause for Sachin, please.
Thank you, Aditi. Good evening and welcome back again for this monthly events. So with a quick round of, with a raise of hand, how many of you here attended the last monthly session here? Okay, so each one of you, I wanted to thank in person because last time we sold out all the copies, those were out on sale. और मैं आपको धन्यवाद आज क्यों दे रहा हूँ? क्योंकि जब अगले महीने में आऊँ तो मुझे इस बात के लिए आपको फिर से धन्यवाद देने की ज़रूरत पड़े. So let's continue this performance of VLF. You know, as I always say, that keep buying books, not for yourself, if for others. With the overwhelming response that we received in the last monthly session, we will continue the structure of discount from VLF. So the discounts, just to explain, Crossword gives us 10% discount flat on the MRP, and VLF will additionally give rupees 100 discount for the MRP, whatever it is. So yes. So I look forward for a same performance this month. Now, as a tradition, I have been announcing the next month session that we always undertake. But unfortunately, we are in talks with a couple of authors and a couple of publishers. We haven't frozen the author and the date as yet. So I'm not in a position to disclose. But in the last few days, the working committee of VLF met and we deliberated on the annual event that we undertake. So I'm not giving you the assurance, but most probably this is going to be 4th and 5th of February 23. That's what we could make out. But this is provided that we speak with some more partners, the publishers and the authors, and of course the venue partners and everybody. So if everybody's on the same page, then most probably this is 4th and 5th of February. Otherwise, maybe a week here and there. But looks like that's how we are going to be. From Secretary's desk, Always I invite every one of you to contribute to this cause. One of the patrons today is going to tell you his experience at VLF. The least that you can do is spread a word, attend our monthly events, and the most you can do is keep reading, keep buying books. And there are various ways you can connect with us that subsequent slides will tell you. But please come forward, spread a word, and join this bandwagon for this city of Nagpur. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachin, for your very encouraging words. It's time for our patron's note. We are very fortunate to have yet another overachiever for a patron, Mr. R. Ramakrishnan. Professionally, he is a chartered accountant and a cost accountant, a serial entrepreneur and an angel investor, the co-founder and chairman of Azyno Capital, and Erda and Macintosh Global Partners, which is a global investment bank among the top 10 in the world. He is an innovator who fuels startups through mentoring, incubating, and funding. He is the ex-president of TIE Nagpur. Rama is also an advisory board member of Vigyan Bharati, an Indian science movement, and the Karyakarta of Vivekanand Kendra, Kanyakumari. A philanthropist, an intellectual, a go-getter, in short, a legend. Let's welcome Mr. Rama with a round of applause.
Those were really heavy words, right? Let's reserve it for the author. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, super excited to be part of this VLF community. Just wanted to share some thoughts about my book reading, what it makes to the world, and all of that. So in one of the avatars, as my friend pointed out, I mentor a lot of startups, wannabe entrepreneurs, wannabe entrepreneurs. And this discussion often comes up that successful leaders and entrepreneurs like Bill Gates of Microsoft, Jack Dorsey of Twitter, Mark Zuckerberg of Meta now, not Facebook, and in India, Gautam Adani of the Adani Group, they're all dropouts, either school or a college dropout. So is it kind of oxymoron, reading books, schooling, dropout, right? And the often answer is, it's inversely proportionate. Schooling is inversely proportionate to being successful. It may sound counterintuitive, right? But let me quickly caveat by saying, schooling is not reading books, right? These very successful entrepreneurs and leaders start a new book every week, right? They read books of the context in which the current ecosystem is, environment is, business is, and what is the future going to be. They read 52 books on an average in a year. That's the average reading of any of the successful entrepreneurs. So let me say, book reading is so very quintessential. We are all hearing about Elon Musk and his Twitter bid recently. In one of the recent interviews, Elon Musk was asked, how could you ever imagine building a colony in Mars with 90%, my son tells me that it has 90% carbon dioxide, right? We all know it's inhabitable. And how could he even build a rocket? Often we hear rocket science. It's not a rocket science, right? We know rocket science, rocketry, very complex. How could he even build a rocket, and that too reusable rocket, which is the bastion and core competency of institutions like NASA and ISRO, and that too not acquired over 3-4 years, but over multiple decades they build this competency. And here is one Elon Musk who builds reusable rocket at 1/4 the cost and beats NASA and ISRO, and now he sells rockets to NASA, right? When this question was posed to him, his 3-word answer was, by reading books. Believe me, this is what he answered. He didn't give a long answer. He said, by reading books. Friends, this is the profound impact one could make. This is the life-changing, not just game-changing, life-changing impact a book can make, a non-fiction book can make, right? And that's the raison d'etre at VLF. And I have personally enriched more so after joining VLF, right? When you sign up the charter, right? When Fensikar sir and Sachin met me, and we discussed about the lovely contribution VLF has been making to the fabric of the city, to the intellectual fabric of the city. I was deeply moved, impacted. I signed up immediately on the same coffee as a volunteer and a patron. And believe me, when you join a mission, it's a mission, right? When you join a mission, you have to live up to the mission. And also when you stand up in a forum like this, you commit yourselves to reading more books, right? Isn't it? So I have doubled up my reading on books. And this is the book that I am reading, Michio Kaku, right? It's a wonderful book, The Future of the Mind, right? The next version has also come. I'm reading that also simultaneously, The God Equation. Friends, I will strongly encourage all of you, many of you, to sign up with VLF in whatever form you want to desire. It could be a volunteer, it could be reading books, it could be buying books, it could be spreading the word. Believe me, it's game changing because the schooling system doesn't take you where you want to be. It is like studying industrial era in a AI world, right? It is as archaic as that. So I strongly recommend all of you to join this bandwagon, VLF, contribute as much as possible. We have to spread the word and participate in this. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rama, for those very inspiring words. At VLF, we never forget why we started. One of our primary aims is to encourage the incredible authors of Vidarbha. And this we do as often as we can. Today we have the pleasure and the privilege to have amongst us Sandhya Deshpande, author of the books Sultan, Swaraganga and World Through My Lens. Sandhya ma'am is truly multifaceted. She is a dedicated, innovative science teacher who has been crowned as an orator of the town. Her paper was adjudged the best paper and published in a national journal. Full of life and energy, she loves to spread happiness and wins everyone over with her sense of humor and wit. She still teaches at my school, so I can personally vouch for that. Sandhya, we would love to know more about your books. The stage is yours.
Good evening to one and all present. First of all, let me thank Aditi for introducing me so well. I don't know what to say. And secondly, I want to thank Sachin because the year I became his daughter's class teacher, that was the turning point. And in every parent-teacher meeting, he will bring one new book for me to read. And that actually, like a child, inculcated a habit of reading. Otherwise, I was busy reading only science books, resource books, and reference books, etc., etc. So thank you, Sachin. Thank you so much for that. Now, my small book right now, which people are talking about, The World Through My Lens, is actually based on the keen observation. Since I'm living with the most, keen observation, kindness at the heart, positivity, peace in mind, thoughts revolving around all the time, just a desire to share with the people I love. This book is the outcome of the wonderful, colorful, happy, simple, innocent, intelligent, unique, bubbly people around me all the time. Yes, my student, whom I call my children. It does have many day-to-day life experiences, including the first chapter as a very interesting story of me, myself, I shouldn't be alive, and the last chapter, my death. In between, whatever I have seen, I have experienced children being pressurized out of expectations, how they get indulged into unfair means to score more marks, or emotionally broken children, or getting into bad habits or abusive language in a well-cultured family where the child has never spoken. So all this made me think a lot about, so I made small chapters. There are around 55 chapters in this. There were some children who actually motivated me as a teacher because in life there are certain points where you feel the stagnation. And there, some child like Chintan, some child like Vaibhav, some child like Rohit are there to give that spark, ignition to the teacher also, who again starts moving with the same energy. And this is what these children have added to my life. And I am thankful and will be indebted to them throughout my life. Yes, book reading has become a part of it. And being a very emotional person, I don't like a lot of drama and melodrama which people create these days. And that's why living with the children is a more simple thing these days. Then When I became a school teacher in Bhavans, it was totally a change of hardware and software in me. I was a computer professional. From there, becoming a school children, I was getting jobs abroad, but then I preferred to teach children of my school. Later, they went abroad. That's a different story, but doesn't matter. I'm still happy teaching my children of my country. I love my country. So these have some chapters which are for parents also, for children also, for good teachers also. How a teacher could be an entertainer. How can a topic be explained by a joke or maybe a story or a scene of a movie. All that is included in this in a very interesting manner. I hope all those who will read will enjoy. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am really overwhelmed. Thank you. This is a great platform. I would like to be the volunteer of VLF. Thank you, Sachin.
Thank you, ma'am, for making us a part of your journey. Galloping on, let's meet our moderator, Mr. Rajiv Agrawal. He's a business thinker and advisor with a vast experience of working around the globe, holding top management positions in Fortune 500 MNCs. Rajiv has a keen interest in horses and horseback riding. He has also been a VLF patron since the inception. He has a regular column in the Hitwad, in which he writes on a range of topics, right from empirical management to travelogues to general principles of life. He also gives guest lectures at the Indian Institute of Management in Nagpur, as well as other associations and societies in the region. Having lived and worked abroad all his life, Rajiv is truly a globetrotter. He is now happily settled in Nagpur, which works out very well for VLF indeed. Readers, please join me in welcoming Mr. Agrawal with a round of applause. The stage is yours.
Good afternoon, readers. It's a pleasure for me to be sitting here in front of all such a well-read and educated person. Sandhya ma'am I know very well, and it's really a privilege to be here. But today the show is not mine. Today the show belongs to Yashaswini Chandra, who is the author of this wonderful book, The Tale of the Horse. May I please welcome you on the stage.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Aditi, for pointing out the importance of the horse. I'm so grateful to Sachin and Pavan and Sukhda for inviting me. It's a real honor to have this sort of a platform. I think VLF is a wonderful initiative. It just sort of burst onto the literary scene. And in the process, we, outsiders, have also been introduced to the culture of reading and writing in Nagpur and Vidarbh. I learnt about Sandhya ji's wonderful book, and I look forward to reading. And thank you to all of you for coming, braving the heat, and coming for this session. And I'm so glad to be doing this with you.
Absolutely, the pleasure is entirely mine, and I hope that we can extend that pleasure to all the wonderful readers who are sitting in front of us. So, coming to your book, now this book is actually a research paper. I mean, you've got about 50 odd pages of bibliography. You've had the humility to acknowledge each and every contributor who's made this book possible. But the credit goes to you for extracting the information from 50 pages of references and bibliography. Now, when you think about a research paper, you think it's going to be a very, very serious piece of work. But let me just, before I start introducing Yashaswini to you, let me just introduce a variety of style of writing. I'll just read a few lines from the book. Now this is a research paper which is considered to be serious, but here, please hear every word. If you can't understand, raise your hand, I'll repeat the words, because you must catch every word. Next, now she's talking about the Amrit Manthan in our mythology, which is well known to all of us. Now just hear the way she expresses it. Next, the snake, Vasuki, was flung around the mountain. The Asuras holding its head firmly as the gods caught hold of its tail. They took turns tugging at the snake, its mouth venting the fire and fumes which coalesced into clouds, flashing with lightning, falling as rain on the toiling gods. The mountains swung wildly, the cosmic waters swirling and crashing against it until they were transformed into milk and the milk into butter. The force and friction of this titanic act wreaked death and destruction as the beings living in the waters perished and the fires raged down Mount Mandara. It carries on, and maybe I was caught in, this is just the very first page of the book. I was caught, sort of really amazed by the vividness with which she has expressed this. Now, we've read about the Amrit Manthan, we've heard about it, but have you heard it this way? And you then carry on, Yashaswini, talking about the horse.
So the devil lies in the detail. If I had just mentioned it in terms of the basic storyline, or if I had just quoted statistics, the sort of the scale of the event, the implications of the event would not have come out. And like, for example, one of the treasures that emerges from the Samudra Manthan, the churning of the cosmic ocean, was the horse Uchchai Shravas. So the primeval horse, this dazzling white stallion, right? And you get a sense of what an achievement it was to obtain this horse. The horse was obtained by the gods, and immediately the tussle was between the gods and the asuras. The horse chose the side of the gods. So that is humans attributing a certain noble, a certain high-class quality character to the horse. And if you visualize it, if you start thinking about the horse, Uchchai Shravas, emerging from the waters, I was struck because to me it seemed, it was very evocative of the historical fact of the horse being imported, of large numbers of horses being imported over history, through much of India's history, from the Middle East by sea. So ships packed with horses used to arrive from the Arabian Peninsula and Iran. And to me, that detail seemed to be reflected in this myth.
But see, what I always would like you to share with our audience is that how did you develop this interest in horses?
I get asked that question a lot. And as Aditi rightly pointed out, we don't tend to notice the horse. We all have a sense, we all obviously, have an image of a horse. We have a sense of a rider, of riding. We see images of riders. We rarely notice the horse, the animal, because there's such a sharp contrast between those millenniums when the horse was central to human civilization and now, when the horse is quite marginal to the scene. And I don't think I would have been and considering how important the horse was, for the longest time, the horse was the single most important item of import into India, right? So even if you're looking at it from a very cold, prosaic, economical perspective, that's how important the horse was. But like I said, because the horse is not something that we are accustomed to now, we sort of forget how important it was. And I don't think that if I didn't have that personal experience of horses, if I didn't ride horses, if I weren't mad about horses, I don't think I would have realized the force that they can be.
But how did you is there anything that you carry from a lineage which attracts you towards horses?
So both my parents used to ride. My mother was very fond of riding, and I think that she passed on that love of horses to me. And yeah, I think that's how it came about. My mum is Bengali, and a senior professor was pulling my leg. He was saying that, how can you be half Bengali and ride? How can your Bengali mother have passed on her love of horses to you? Bengalis are not known as riders. And he was telling, not known as riders. And he was telling the story of two very famous Bengalis actually, Aurobindo and Netaji. They both refused to turn up for the riding test and consequently didn't get into the ICS. So, but ironically, that was my original point of reference.
Okay, so you sort of inherited it from your mother.
Yeah, I
Right,
think her love of horses.
the
yeah,
love of
yeah,
horses.
Yeah, and now it's like very much a part of my being. I sort of begin, if I don't ride on a regular basis, I sort of begin to
Okay.
lose my mind.
Okay. So I think next time when she comes to the VLF, we must
You're going to
organize a
get me on a
horse.
horse.
But jokes apart, I think what is also amazing is that your study program has taken you across to the UK as well, right? And where you sort of worked on your history of arts.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something you'd like to share about that?
So, thank you for, attributing scholarly rigor to my book. And because it's my academic training really that made me research the book as thoroughly as I did. So I studied history and then I did a master's in history of art. I went and did my PhD in history of art from SOAS. I taught there for a year. So the research is very much based on that training that I've had. But because the subject is so close to my heart, I wanted to write about a general audience. I wanted to try and ensure that the poor horse gets its due and gets noticed. So, and I wanted the book to be as widely appreciated as possible. I've tried to inject it with as much storytelling as I can without diluting, the serious analytical side of it.
Well, I can quite see that because if I look at the book, it is full of a lot of serious matter, plus there are good anecdotes, and maybe I'll leave it to you to maybe start with the serious matter, because where you talk about the trade and the roots and how you research that and a bit on that, you could talk.
Yeah, so broadly, so there were horses were imported for the longest time through overland trade from Central Asia and Tibet, and by sea from the Middle East. Horses were also bred in different parts of India, probably most parts of India. India has a bad reputation thanks to the commentary of certain foreign travelers and then the British, the colonialists, the colonists, that there was something wrong with the air of India, there was something wrong with the climate of India. You couldn't really breed horses, but that's not true. In fact, horses were being bred in India, and in certain parts of India, horses were even being bred in herds, right? But not enough horses were being bred in India. So large numbers had to be imported from all these different sources. And in the process, a lot of migrations followed. Like a lot of horse traders, for example, they gained a lot of political power in India. They had a lot of clout as horse traders because, horses were the main weapon of war. There was a great demand for it. These horse traders were dealing with kings and generals at the highest level. So in the process, they gained a lot of political power and rose to great heights in India. So yeah, and so basically I look at all these different facets. And also, the cultural side of it, the importance of the horse is reflected in literature, not just mythology, literature, art, popular culture, and what is of course very important to the book is for me to emphasize the bond between humans and animals, so there was that emotional connection, and we have so many wonderful stories of different people, different icons from history being devoted to very particular horses.
Yeah, you touch upon quite a few interesting persons. In fact, you've got within your book, you've devoted, since we are sitting in Vidarbha, which is an integral part of Maharashtra. So you have spoken quite a bit about Shivaji and the Marathas, how they sort of, utilized horses and the guerrilla tactics and all.
Yeah, like for example, when I was talking about like the horse breeding territories of India. So one major territory was, the valley of the Bhima River and its tributaries. The Marathas started breeding horses of their own from probably the 17th century. Shivaji sort of was really encouraged horse breeding, and he made all kinds of, he gave a lot of tax break to people to grow fodder. And And over time, they developed a very particular breed of horses, known as the Deccani horse or the Bhima pony, right? And these were very small and agile horses. They were quite quick, sturdy, speedy. So mounted on these horses, these Maratha horsemen would really be able to like harass the Mughal army. Yeah, so the Mughal army was this huge lumbering entity. You know, it had a cavalry, it had elephants, it had guns. You know, it was like a camp on the move. There were even like dancing girls, and like there was a bazaar that would follow it. So it was very, very slow moving. And these like packs of fast riding Marathas used to come and sort of like harass them and provoke them and then sort of run away. And the Mughal army would lumber after them, and then they would retreat into their hill forts, which were of course very difficult to breach. And that worked. These guerrilla tactics worked because the Marathas really gave the Mughals a run for their money.
I mean, we know about the fighting skills of the Marathas, but this aspect of what was the contribution of the horse and the selection of the horse is something which has come out very well in this book.
This is what I mean. The horse doesn't get its due. Like that kind of like, those kind of battle tactics, you know, the rise of the Maratha polity that challenged the mighty Mughal Empire would not have been possible had they not had the appropriate mounts, right?
There you go. Yeah.
So,
I think,
you know, we've come, I think, thankfully, we've come a long way since great man history. You know, when you were writing biographies and you were writing histories just around some great man or the other, some like king or emperor, right? I think there is much more to the world, including our historical experience to it, than the deeds of great men or even people. You know, we don't sort of tend to take a lot of what constitutes our world for granted.
So, you know, coming back, linking this particular research you've done and the years which you spent in London when you were doing your PhD, is there anything that you could connect between they have a fervor for the Ascot races and all that we hear, plus the influence?
The British were quite horrible when they came to India, even from the point of view of horses, because they were highly disparaging of all these Indian breeds. They were like, oh, look at these small horses, look at these inadequate horses. They're like the people. You know, these like small Indians with their small horses, they're just not up to the mark. And there's something wrong with the climate. You know, so the colonial discourse tended to revolve a great deal around the climate. The climate tended to be blamed for all of India's imagined ills. So the climate was such you couldn't really breed good, solid horses in India. Ironically, if you look back into England's own horsey past, you will find some clues. So historically, like, I mean, you must have all seen all these like epic medieval English dramas like Braveheart, and all these knights are supposed to be riding these huge chargers, you know, like these fierce
those stallions in the
yeah, but like even in the average size of the horse in medieval England was actually quite small. And recent research by the University of Exeter has really emphasized that point, that this is a Hollywoodized imagination of what these medieval European horses used to be like. They were actually quite small. And over time, they started breeding bigger and bigger horses, and that had to do with the use of horses in agriculture. So you needed much bigger, sturdier horses to pull the plow. And then they developed a premier class of race horses, the thoroughbred. Now all racing, like high-class, standardized racing, is with thoroughbreds. And so they had a history of of breeding bigger and bigger horses, right? And then they come to India and they're like, you know, we have to just like we've improved our own horse flesh, we have to improve the horse flesh in India.
You know, since you talk about breeding, like I spent a few years in Dubai, and I used to keep on seeing this, you know, the horse transport vans with Godolphin written on it. And I would always wonder what this Godolphin is. Godolphin, I was thinking, but it's got horses inside, so it's not the dolphins. And then I read your book and I get the answer to that. So maybe you can share that with the audience.
Godolphin was one of the 3 original Arab sires right? So like a sire is a stallion that's used for breeding, that were crossed with British mares to produce what is now known as the thoroughbred. So these are like really high-class horses, very quick. They have a wonderful frame. They're very good-looking, So like they sort of are I've said in the book that they were supposed to be the equine counterpart of the English aristocracy, right? And the English aristocracy that took the lead in breeding these horses was sort of like, they were fussed about their own lineage, they were fussed about the pedigree of their animals. And they kept records, they kept these stud books. And so yeah, that's Godolphin for you.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? I forget.
I think that's true, because you mentioned there were three principal, Arab sires.
Yeah. So that's
that
how the
good,
that's how the thoroughbred came about. And when they came to India, during the colonial period, the British when they were sort of feeling quite displeased with the Indian horses, they tried to import all these horses from Europe and South Africa and all kinds of places to try and to cross with Indian mares to try and improve the quality of horses in India. And a lot of those horses were thoroughbreds.
I mean, you say it so casually, but it's taken you so much of research to come to this particular point, and so much of reading all the various, documented, undocumented information to come to this, because I don't think there was real massive documentation on the subject of horses. You were looking at art pieces and all that.
Yeah, so actually there were very few dedicated sources, right? There was no like one go-to source, like if you want to write about the Mughal period, if you want to write about the Mughal Empire, you'll read the Akbarnama or Abul Fazl's Ain-e-Akbari. There was no like history of the horse across ages from, the medieval period that I could have turned to. But the interesting thing is the horse is everywhere. Once you start reading historical sources, historical chronicles, even modern works of history, once you start looking at, Indian paintings carefully, you find that the horse is a figure, is a character, because it was so important. It's just that we haven't noticed it. But it means that I had to look at a range of sources. And because I wanted to map the presence of the horse across different facets of our history, right, and culture, I had to look at a variety of sources. And I'm an art historian by training, so I was never going to ignore the visual sources. And I've used images also to try and to make certain points, to make certain cases. Like the cover of the book, for example, there's a famous Pahari painting by the artist Nain Sukh. And the reason I chose that painting for the cover is because it's quite representative. There it is. It's quite representative. It features a prince. So that the horse as an elite animal appears. But a woman is also represented on it on horseback, right? There are a couple of musicians who are on horseback. So it sort of is meant to symbolize the presence of the horse historically in India across different classes, the relationship of different classes and communities with the horse. And on the back cover, can you flip it, so this is the back one, This is a famous painting by a Rajasthani artist, Bhakta, of a horse being led by its groom or handler or sais, right? And now again, this is like an aspect of the history of the horse we don't pay attention to. We just think of the horse in association with the rider, Maharana Pratap and Chetak. But what about the chaps who are actually looking after the animals? Who were responsible for their day-to-day care? What about the people who were breeding them? So I wanted to write a very holistic account of the horse.
Well, I must say that yes, you have. It's and also the way you have when you write about Maharaja Ranjit Singh. You've devoted quite a few pages to him. Yes, horse mad.
Maybe known by the British as the horse mad king.
So you have written something which I like. Maybe you would like to read out this clip to the audience, where you sort of analyzed, and you could give a bit of a background and then...
So I've talked about, like I said, the British were terribly So there are lots of colonial accounts of different officials visiting Ranjit Singh's court in Lahore and being completely floored by his horsemanship. He was supposed to be a great connoisseur of horses. He was supposed to be very knowledgeable, and he was himself supposed to be a great horseman. One colonial official wrote that he's the ugliest and most unpreposing man in Punjab till he gets on a horse. He gets on a horse and suddenly, he gains stature and grace and he looks wonderful, right? That is and they really tried to take advantage of the man's soft spot for horses. At one point, a colonial official, Alexander Burns, wanted to survey the Indus River towards like a colonial project, right? And Ranjit Singh was obviously very wily. He wasn't going to give permission that easily, right? Because he knew that, this might open the floodgates. So very cleverly, the British arranged to send a gift of 4 English horses, right? Very special, dappled grey draft horses that was supposed to be sent by the King Emperor all the way from Britain. And these officials write to Ranjit Singh and say that, these horses, they've come from England, they're not used to the climate in India, they can't walk through the heat to come to Lahore. You have to give us permission to bring them up, to sail up the Indus River with these horses. And in the process, Alexander Burns conducts his survey, right? So that is the colonial side of it, right? But equestrian paintings, so the book, there a lot of images have been used, paintings have been used as sources in the book. The book is also illustrated with a number of images. So the equestrian paintings of portraits of Ranjit Singh depicting him on horseback tell the Indian side of the story. So I describe one such equestrian portrait and I write, considering that the Maharaja was ailing at the time the painting was made, an air of austerity pervades it. Yet there is something jubilant about him in his flowing robes, riding a white stallion. Its legs dyed in henna. The emblems of kingship, the halo surrounding his head and the resplendent parasol held above it by a male attendant, whose chiseled features recall the famous good looks of the Sikh courtiers, were derived from Mughal or Rajput court paintings. Within the set format of kingly equestrian portraits, Ranjit Singh appears in his inimitable style. So there are lots of such descriptions.
It just, sort of brings the painting to life. And that's, where she can talk about the vivid, Amrit Manthan, and here's such a delicate part of art and painting. It just shows the range of writing skills that you have. But I also like to touch upon the humor which you've injected in the book. We've all heard this phrase, "Ghode bech ke sona." How many have not heard of it? Everyone. Till now I didn't know why it came into being as a phrase. Yashaswini will explain it to us.
Yeah, so basically I talked about horse traders and I talked about how, horse traders once upon a time historically enjoyed a lot of clout. The horse traders who brought horses into India from abroad. And like for example, Sher Shah Suri, he was the grandson of a horse trader from Afghanistan. And later when he became the Sultan, he built the most fabulous mausoleum for his grandfather, the horse trader. And I visited it. It's in Narnaul in Haryana. And there was an ASI official and he was showing, I took my students, I was teaching at Ashoka University then. And he was showing us around and he's like, "Oh, dekhiye Ibrahim Khan ka tomb." And I was like, "Oh my God, wo ghode ka saudagar." Because, it is quite incredible if you think about it. And also, it was a very risky business bringing horses from all the way from the Eurasian steppes through Central Asia and Afghanistan into India. You can imagine the number of horses that would sort of die, fall by the wayside, get injured, get looted. Then the poor horses that came by sea. There were like loads of horses packed into a ship. Their feed would be rotting. Horses are in any case super sensitive, right? And then they would have felt seasick, which would be very traumatic for a horse because a horse can't vomit. right? So you experience seasickness, and that like becomes colic, which is a life-threatening condition for horses, and you have people, you have observers talking about, oh, these ships laden with horses, they were just stinking. And so there was a great risk involved. Again, there would be a lot of losses of horses at sea, right? So, and then, like, for example, in the colonial period, there was a total crackdown on horse traders from abroad. The British were very suspicious of all these like alien influences on India. They just didn't understand the concept of interconnected spaces. Once upon a time, there was traffic across Eurasia, right? They didn't understand, they understood the concept of rigid borders. So they really cracked down upon this centuries old trade. So it was quite an achievement selling a horse. So hence, ghoda bech ke soya.
There you go. There's another very interesting thing, I'm a Punjabi and my mother comes from the region of Jalandhar. My sister Rita is also here, my elder one. So we've been growing up, hearing my mother make a very wonderful statement. At times when somebody shows off something and it's not really worth that, so she says in Punjabi, I'll say it in Punjabi, Kidda jidda Noor Mahal di Sarah. So Noor Mahal di Sarah is something which we've been listening to while growing up. And guess what? I read this book, I get the answer, what it means.
Okay, that's a happy coincidence. I was really shocked and delighted to hear that there is such a saying in Punjabi, because Noor Mahal, so sarais built by the Mughal Empress Noor Jahan were known as Noor Mahal, and they were like literally the 5-star hotels of their time, right? And these caravanserais, the Mughal built caravanserais all over horse trading routes, right? The major highways of Mughal India that corresponded with horse trading routes that connected the eastern reaches of the empire to the northwestern reaches, all the way through, to Afghanistan, Kabul, Kandahar, right? And this Dutch visitor said that Noor Jahan is a great builder of all these very luxurious caravanserais and beautiful gardens, because she, through these architectural means, she wants to leave her legacy. She wants to be remembered by posterity. And she is.
She is. I mean,
So it worked.
It worked, absolutely. But it took me quite a bit of life to get to understand what is the meaning of that. So, I mean, the word caravanserai.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. If any of you ever go to Jalandhar, there is a Noor Mahal near Jalandhar that I've made a case study of in this book, and it is beautiful. It literally is the Radisson. What Radisson is to Nagpur, it would have been to Mughal India.
So these caravanserais are, places where the horses, which are being, they are traveling down for trade, the horse traders, their accompaniments, and all these people, it's a resting place for them, like the rest houses for them.
Yeah. So your typical caravanserai would be like a quadrangle with a huge courtyard in the middle, and all these horses would be tied in the courtyard. So the caravanserais were very important, and caravanserais, the Mughals, while most of their revenue was derived, most of their wealth, their legendary wealth, came from land revenue. They were also concerned with promoting trade, right? And trade from across Central Asia, from across Iran. And so they enhanced, different networks of roads. They built forts, they posted garrisons, and, the entire Mughal establishment built all these caravanserais just to facilitate trade, right? Trade in general, but horses were the single most important item of import. So obviously they were a factor.
I mean, it's something which in current era we cannot think of our economy depending on import and trade of horses, but that was one of the most important,
Absolutely.
And we're talking about...
and you got everything in a caravanserai, apparently. you got grass, you got hay, there were farriers who could sort of change the horseshoes of these horses. You also got like clothes sellers, washermen, dancing girls and boys. So that's how these caravanserais were described as very bustling places.
I mean, it's like a resort, right?
Less posh. No, actually Noor Mahal would be very posh. The best and the biggest of horse traders would go to the Noor Mahals.
Very, very interesting, because when you look at the trade was a very serious business. Like I was reading in your book that when the horses were traveling by sea, you mentioned, there was a certain guarantee that was given by the buyer to the trader, that when the trader shipped the horses by sea, that the number of horses that boarded were the amount of money he would be paid, irrespective of how many reach alive, right? And you've mentioned something about that.
Yeah, again, like I said, it was a very risky business, and there was, the turnover rate was quite high. There would be, a horse trader would know that, he was likely to lose a lot of horses at sea. But obviously, like these South Indian kings especially, who were one of the main sort of consumers of these horses, because the stakes were so high, they were so desperate for these horses, because cavalry warfare was obviously driven by horses, that in order to incentivize this trade, they would, they had to pay upfront. I want so many horses, and I will pay you an advance, right? And even if those horses died at sea, the money for them would be paid, but the clients would want the guarantee. They would want assurance that the horses were actually put onto the ship and did die at sea, and that the trader is not cheating them. So what these traders would do is cut off the tails and the ears of the horses and show them as proof, obviously after they had died. Yeah. But once you start visualizing, once you start thinking about these details, you realize all kinds of connotations. Like, what did they do with the bodies? They obviously threw the carcass of the horse overboard, right? We hear of sailors dying at sea, but imagine horses dying at sea.
And then the tails being lopped off and being produced as evidence that these number of horses were there. I mean, it sounds gory, but that was the nature of business that time. Very interesting anecdotes. And I think you mentioned about, how many of you all have seen this movie Gangubai Kathiawadi? Yeah. What else is Kathiawad famous for? Bingo. I mean, a lot of people knew. I didn't know it.
Since ancient times, these Kachi the sort of the ancestors of the modern Kathiawadi horse were being bred in Kutch, in Kathiawad. There was a community, the Kathi community, one of the few Indian communities that was dedicated to the business of breeding horses. So, yeah.
I mean, that's huge. I didn't know that there was such a huge base of horse breeding in Gujarat.
Yeah, and they were quite these horses were also quite highly regarded. In the ancient period, Panini, the grammarian, was very dismissive of the horses from Gujarat. But the Mughal chronicles are full of references to these Kachi horses. At one point, Jahangir was like, someone gave me a lovely Kachi horse, and I never received such a nice gift in my life. And then he was like, and some what should I put it? Like, some noble of mine was terribly keen on the horse, and he had been very good of late, so I gave him the horse.
But you've also spoken about the gift of the Kohinoor being given.
Yeah. That was so like, So like, there's a rumor. Punjab is full of these sayings. There was a belief in Punjab that this Maharaja Ranjit Singh was so fond of his horse Laili that he used to tie the Kohinoor onto it. But I found no references.
So it's more of hearsay, right?
Yeah, hearsay. But again, the fact that memory exists of a horse having been so precious and invaluable.
I mean, now since you're a lady and you're a woman, and there are quite a few ladies and women You've touched upon the link of the women and horses and horse riding, about Chand Bibi, and you've also spoken about the riding styles of the Indian and the European women, how they would ride horses.
Yeah, so like I'm a horsewoman. I'm coming to this book as a horsewoman. I'm not just going to write about all kinds of great men and their associations with all their horses. And especially when there is a lot of evidence of, the association between women and horses. You would think that sort of elite women observing parda would not be able to ride. But they managed to learn how to ride. They rode within their women's quarters. They taught each other how to ride. They found ways to even go out and ride in public. So there's a painting of Akbar receiving his mother, and her escort consists of a number of female servants wearing a burqa, covered from head to toe, and still managing to sit on their horses and ride on and appear in the open on horseback. At one point, this Mem Sahab, this British Mem Sahab, Fanny Parks, some of you might have heard of her, she was a great traveller. She goes and she rides with a group of Maratha women, including Bezabai, the exiled queen of Gwalior. And she talks about what fantastic riders these women were. And she was like, oh, we European women have to sit side saddle. So like this, coyly with our legs together. You can't sit astride like a man. But look at these Marathas, they sit astride these Maratha women, they sit astride on their horses. And she's like, if I could, and then she was convinced to try that style of riding, to sit on a horse like a man with her legs astride. And she's like, wow, I felt like I could have jumped over the moon. And I have a theory about the distinctive Maratha sari. I think that style was developed so that women could sit on horses more comfortably.
And I think Bezabai tried to sit sideways like the European, and she made a mess of it.
No. One of the Maratha women tried to sit in that style, and she was literally falling off her horse, clinging onto her saddle.
So, it's a very interesting content in your book. I think you've touched upon a lot of things. And there's another piece of humor where you mention someone, getting cursed by saying, may his wives be divorced. Yeah, may his wives be divorced, kind of a thing.
So this when I was talking about the Mughals doing what they had to do, the entire Mughal establishment promoting trade through the realm, this is actually an inscription on Noor Mahal at Jalandhar. In the 18th century, the governor instructed his officials not to tax traders. And the inscription says that those who contravened, went against his order and did go ahead and tax traders, may their wives be divorced.
There you go. So, I don't know whether that's going to be something which people say, oh no, in today's world. Some may actually enjoy it. Well, moving on to some another serious stuff, you mentioned about the connection of Manipur and polo in the book.
So I was very surprised that a lot of people don't know this, but Manipur is the birthplace of modern polo. And the Manipuri is another indigenous breed of indigenous breed of horses from the subcontinent. And some British officials observed Manipuri teams playing polo, and they were totally taken with the game. And that's how, and they adopted it, and they did reinvent it and changed some of the, sort of reinvented it and standardized it. But in fact, that was the origins of polo.
That's something absolutely, I didn't know that Manipur was, so well connected to it.
Yeah.
So I think Aditi is looking at the clock. Are we okay on time? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
So this.
Yeah. But then then obviously I started delving into it, because when did they start playing polo? When was this breed of horses developed? So I started looking at Manipuri chronicles, right? But in fact, those chronicles are full of references to elephants.
To elephants?
Yeah. And there are lots of stories about elephants, and at one point a baby elephant was brought on what are those things? In a palanquin. So, yeah. So,
Maybe the guys who lifted it.
that's true, actually. I never thought about them. And so the elephant also remained an important kingly symbol in different cultures of the subcontinent. But yeah, even in Manipur, this distinctive breed was developed over time, quite late, but in the 18th century, and then polo became, and polo is now considered a very elitist sport. You know, it's a very niche, very elitist sport. But in Manipur, it was a popular, even now it's played as a popular sport.
Oh.
Yeah, and even there are references of polo. Similarly, polo in Ladakh was also played in Ladakh. A form of polo was also played in Ladakh. And that was also in the nature of a mass sport. You know, so literally it used to be played in the streets of the town.
Very interesting, very fascinating. So I think we've come to Aditi, would you like to take it on?
We would like to open the stage for questions now, really, so the readers can interact with you. So any questions?
So
We would start taking, yeah.
who's moderating the questions? I mean,
So we'll keep an eye on.
Yeah. So that was very interesting. Thank you, so much for all the detail and research on horses. Talking of Punjab, there is a tradition where in every wedding the groom comes on a horse.
Thank you for asking that question. That is a very important question. Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier. This business by which a groom rode in his marriage procession on a ghodi, and that too a safed ghodi, you know, white mare, is a more recent development, right? While, you know, obviously that would have been historically the best possible way for a groom to come to get married. It wasn't standardized. They rode horses of all kinds of colors. They rode, you know, male horses, stallions and geldings apart from mares. It becomes a contentious issue. It can become, like when I was talking about writing, you know, not writing just an elitist history of the horse. The symbolism of the horse, you know, the connotations attached to a horse can be very varied. Like for example, even today, Dalit bridegrooms are forcibly prevented from riding in their wedding processions, right? And that has to do with, you know, the appropriation of the horse as an elite animal. That only certain classes, only certain castes can ride horses, right? And I made a case study of this. I made a case study of this historical tradition by which certain classes rode in their wedding processions, and certain classes were prevented in the instance of Rajasthan. And, you know, and a lot of like upper castes, not just the feudal elite, not just the Thakurs, for example, but like even other upper castes would prevent castes lower than them from riding in their wedding processions. And at one point, the state of Jodhpur, Marwar, intervened and said, no, you can't do this. You know, this is, and the implication was like Rajasthan, for example, is a pastoral economy, right? Most people breed horses, most people own horses for their own private use, right? And they can't, and it has been their tradition to ride their horses in their wedding procession. But even in that instance, the official declaration does say that only the lowest of the low are going to be prevented from riding. And the fact that it's now become an act of resistance, you know, so the horse is a very important symbol, you know, so it is now an act of resistance for, say, a Dalit bridegroom to ride in his wedding procession. So that's what, the symbolism of the horse is quite intense. It is still relevant, even though the age of the horse is over.
Hi, I'm Nitin. I just have a question. You We really discovered today that Manipur is the birthplace of polo. Even horses were a central stage in Afghanistan for the Bushkashi game. So if you can put some light on it.
I haven't really studied that form of polo, but different forms of polo probably emerged in, I think polo would have emerged in Central Asia, I think. But different forms of polo started being played across this entire sort of, this entire interconnected space, Central Asia, the subcontinent. So Gilgit, Baltistan, you know, polo used to be played in these places. Then in Ladakh, polo was played. Yeah, there's Buskashi, which to me sounds like a particularly, don't use a judgmental word. It seems a very graphic form of polo because I think a carcass or the head of a goat is used instead of a ball. Sheep, yeah. But yeah, it basically, you know, the two different teams of men on horseback wielding these sticks, polo sticks.
My question is, have you seen Serum Institute in Pune?
No,
Cyrus
no.
Poonawala's?
No, I haven't.
A person who loves horses must visit.
I must, yes.
Please,
Absolutely.
you would love to see the interiors. Everywhere you will find horses, and the main idea of Serum Institute came because of all the old horses. What to do with them?
Yes.
So Mr. Poonawala thought, why not to use their serum and make vaccines out of them?
Right.
So I would request.
No, actually, I know about the Poonawalas and their horse breeding. I know about it, and you know, I know they are very important players in the present. Even as horse breeders, the Poonawalas, and they're like major figures in the racing scene.
And because after reading the title of your book, I immediately went to that center, and it is too good for all those who love.
I must have a look.
Please, thank you.
I'm Arvind, and I'd like to add something to what you said. Now, when you are in Maharashtra, so you have to talk about Marathas and Shivaji.
I did?
No, I'd like to add to it. You did. So, the very genesis of the light Maratha cavalry, which was instrumental in the Marathas capturing the territory from Attak to Cuttack, was a guy called Malik Ambar.
He actually initiated these guerrilla tactics, 100%.
He was a very important figure in the Deccan, a slave, a black man. And he was the one who encouraged the Marathas with their light horses to do guerrilla attacks on Mughal camps. So the Maratha men, with very lightly armed or even unarmed, they used to rush with their horses, loot the Mughal camps, bring them to disarray, and then come back. So Malik Ambar is an important central figure.
Malik Ambar is a big part of my book.
In
You
fact,
have to get a copy and read about Malik Ambar.
I'll do. A lot of it, what I'll be speaking about right now would be from what I have read from Mr. Manu Pillai. Now, second, when it comes to the warriors, soldiers were basically a sort of an employment at that point of time. So a soldier with a horse of his own was paid better salary.
Yeah. So they had both. They had like siledars, so, you know, warriors who came along with their horses, and bagirs, warriors who had to be horsed by the state.
Even the British East India Company, when
I just would like to say that, you know, all this what you're saying, I mean, we've just touched the surface of what the book contains, and quite a bit of all this information that you're narrating is actually there. So I think we can leave it for more questions.
Without taking much time, I'll just add one more thing. The Vijayanagara Empire, they conquered Goa simply because they wanted a port.
There is a lot of the Vijayanagara Empire in the book.
I haven't read the book. So,
Pages and pages are dedicated to the Vijayanagara Empire.
So Vijayanagara Empire was brought to its doom.
Can we go to the next question if you don't mind? I mean,
It was brought to its doom simply because by these traders only. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I was just on a note that Surendranath Banerjee actually rode a horse and got into ICS where Aurobindo and Subhash Chandra Bose failed. But more seriously, the subtitle of your book is far more fascinating. It says The History of India on Horseback. So how did you connect? I mean, that's what piques my curiosity about your book, and I'm surely going to grab a copy of it. How did you sort of juxtapose the narrative, or should I call it the Trotternama of Indian history, with the trading of horses? If you can throw light on that, the subtitle of your book.
Yeah, so basically because the book is a history of India from the lens of the horse. Now, however much I love horses, I can't speak for them. So I can only look at the history of the horse in India from the perspective of the impact the horse had. And you realize that the horse was, the horse did play a key role. And it just provides a different way, a different angle to look at the history of the horse, to look at the history of India from this perspective. So that's what the title alludes to. And also because it is a journey through time and space. Ever since, the book, the book begins on the note of, from prehistorical times. The focus of the book is on the sort of the medieval, early modern, colonial periods, on the later periods. But in a way, it begins from, prehistorical times and traces the decline of the horse scene of India into the colonial period, right? So it's a journey on horseback through the eyes of the horse across time and across space, So all the way from Central Asia, the Middle East, different parts of India, South India, there's an entire chapter on South India. Then the different horse breeding territories of India, North India, Rajasthan. I made a case study of Rajasthan. So in that sense, it is a journey on horseback across time and space.
Hi Yashaswini, I had a question.
Hi.
What is one thing about Indian horses or horses in particular that you find very fascinating, or you find hard to believe when you studied horses?
I find it hard to believe. I think once you start interacting with horses, spending time with horses, horsey people, that there's a term, horse mad, right? Because it's really, they are the most fascinating creatures. It's just absolutely thrilling for me. There is nowhere in the world that I'm happier than at the stables. It is just an absolute thrill to sit on a horse, to be able to ride. It's very heartwarming to interact with horses, to spend time with them, to look after them. It means a lot to gain the trust and affection of this mighty, noble beast, So yeah, I think that to me, just, and I was telling Rajiv that no matter how stressed or depressed I am, when I go riding for that half an hour or hour that I'm on horseback, nothing matters. Only my relationship with my horse matters. Being out in the open, that matters. It's like meditation. Your mind is decluttered.
I was sort of, when she said it's like meditation on the horse. I said, wow, that's a fantastic angle.
Yeah, and there are so many stories. It's not just my personal experience. Historically, there are so many stories. I mean, one man loses his horse, he goes mad, he runs into the desert. Yeah, exactly. And then, there's this. Then there's one very famous story from Rajasthan, in which case this hero's mother has to leave him, but she promises him that she will be reincarnated as his horse. And there are so many fights. There were so many fights. There were so many battles that were fought over favorite horses, And at one point, the Emperor Akbar Jahangir actually presented the Rajput general Man Singh with a horse that had been gifted to Akbar by the king of Iran. And Jahangir says, oh, Man Singh was so happy. Even if I had gifted him a kingdom, he couldn't have been happier. So there are stories and there are songs and there are accounts that bring out that close bond between humans and horses, between individual men and women and their individual mounts. So I think that connect, is the most important thing.
Yeah, so hi, it's been a fascinating session, and I'm sure I'm definitely going to be buying the book outside. Much as you've talked about a lot of history and Indian history and global history as well, what about, have you mentioned anything in your book as to your references to children's literature and how children's literature may have some sort of horseplay in it, or any references to horses? Because
You found the hole in my book. I was thinking I've covered it all. I've covered men, women, upper class, lower class, animals. I forgot the children.
Because as kids...
Now you can plan a sequel on this.
Because my daughter was horse mad. I would bought her a book on horses and she would take it to bed with her and clasp it and sleep at night. And I would wonder, and I have read Black Beauty and I used to be absolutely in love with Black Beauty, Anna Sewell. Lots of Enid Blyton has horseback riding, and the 5 fine daughters are always on horseback, or the famous 5 go off into Wales and English countryside and they are tending to horses. So in India, do we have children's literature which deals with the horse?
That would
we
be
have
fascinating.
Panchatantra, we do have Jatak Katha, Panchatantra, yes. Amar Chitra Kathas on basic, but any children's literature?
No, that's a very good question. I should really think about that. I didn't actually. I'm sure there's children's literature in, the Indian equivalent of, tales like Black Beauty, but I'll have to look into it.
Hi, good evening. As you told us earlier that how it is like a meditation for you for doing a horse ride or something. I have just recently started horse riding 1 month back, and it is nowhere near a meditation for me because I am struggling.
Because you've just started. You're trying to stay on the horse.
My question is that, I'm struggling. Why is the horse behaving like that? And I just want to get off the saddle as soon as possible. My question is, how long did you take that transition? I'm sure you must have been through the stage where I am, possibly, where it was difficult for you.
You want practical advice? One of the reasons why I was saying that, no matter how anxious or worried I am, as long as you're on horseback, all those worries fade away. One of the major reasons is because you're so concerned trying not to fall off the horse. That is your most pressing concern. No, it takes time. And riding is something that is something that you have to constantly keep getting better and better at. So it's not like one of those sports where you stop training. It's not like, I don't know, tennis? I've learned how to play the sport, right? You have to continue training with better and better trainers, with more and more difficult horses. It's that kind of a sport.
Yeah. So
but
what you mean to say is...
I think it'll take you at least a year.
I'd probably start just meditating,
It'll be at least a year, before you're sort of comfortable on the quieter, tamer horses.
So, follow up to my question. So, I kind of trying to build a strategy to bring a bond with my horse. So, I'm taking carrots and,
Good
jaggery. So, what was your thing to,
Thank you for asking me the best questions anybody has ever in any of the sessions I've had about this book. The carrots and the jaggery is very important. And so reward. You reward your horse. And this is the thing. Don't do what I call Baba log riding. Bhaiya ghode ko le aao. And then you sit on the horse, you have a nice little trot, and then you get off, right? You should actually groom your horse. You should groom your horse, you should brush your horse, comb its mane, its tail, clean its hooves, learn how to clean its hooves. Saddle it, tack it up, take off the tack, rub it down, give it a bath. You have to invest that kind of time. And you will find at some point that is almost more rewarding than actually riding. That connect is very important, Thank you for asking these questions.
Hello, ma'am. First of all, it was a very enchanting session. I look forward to reading the book. My question was not strictly regarding history, rather mythology. So there have been a lot of connotations regarding equestrian privileges and traditions throughout the world mythology. One which I would like to mention is the Ashwamedh Yagya, which has been very talked about in all of our epics. So what is your favorite equestrian reference or tradition or the proper horse across world mythologies? I would like to know that.
You mentioned that in the book.
That's not mythology. It was the ultimate kingly it was the ultimate sacrifice performed by the greatest of kings, by which after a year a horse used to be sacrificed. It used to be killed, and it was intended to reassert the power and the might and the sovereignty of that particular ruler. And statues of horses used to be made, coins used to be issued with the sacrificial animal just to commemorate that event. As far as, we always think of the Ashwamedh Yag as this, this like spectacle, this sort of spectacular sacrifice, this ultimate kingly ritual. But I have looked at it from the point of view of the horse, because that horse gets killed. And even the Rig Veda has a hymn in which the people who are sacrificing that horse are also guilt-stricken and they ask for forgiveness, which is all very well coming from my perspective, but the horse has had to, was killed. Mythology, the account of the horse emerging from the sea, Uchchaishravas emerging from the sea, that I quite like. The other origin myth pertaining to the horse is that the horse descended from heaven. It was a celestial being, it was a winged creature, and ultimately it descended from heaven. So that gives the horse an almost, gives it a certain divine or at least semi-divine character. And just like the legend of Uchchaishravas brought to my mind the sea trade in horses, that legend of the horse descending from heaven brought to my mind that caravan trade by which the horses arrived from Central Asia, which was considered Bame-Dunya, or the roof of the world.
Just to extend on that, so there is this theory that horses were never there in ancient India. I mean, really old ancient India. And they've come from, the Aryans brought them in. So what do you have to say about that? I mean, is there any substance to this theory, or is it a European theory to, create it?
So the Indo-Aryans migrated from the north and the west over many centuries, very, very gradually in numerous rounds of migration. And suddenly the horse becomes suddenly there's a surplus of evidence of the horse having been domesticated, having been present, having been widely domesticated, whereas there is hardly any evidence of the horse from the earlier Bronze Age Indus Valley civilization. So I think that is a very reasonable hypothesis that the native population of horses disappeared in 8000 BCE. But I would never say that the horse is a foreign animal, because it has been quite prevalent in India. It has been available in India in growing numbers since at least 1500 BCE. Breeds of Indian horses were developed.
Well, I think we've come to the end of a wonderful session. You could see a lot of...
Thank you for coming. Thank you, Rajiv.
It's been my pleasure, absolutely, to read this book, and thanks to VLF requesting me to moderate this session. I've got an opportunity to meet with you, and really, it's been a fantastic experience. And I think the audience also engaged a lot. Thank you very much to the audience for being such good listeners to our banter, which happened this afternoon. And I would strongly recommend that this book is full. What you've just heard and experienced is, as they say, the tip of the iceberg. The bulk of it is contained in the contents, as a dear friend who was trying to raise certain details are all going to be found in the book. So please do, when you're making your way outside, pick up a copy for you all to read. You will love it. Thank you very much, Yashaswini,
Thank
for
you so
sparing the
much.
time.
Thank you, Rajiv. This session has truly removed my blinders and opened my eyes to a whole new way of looking at our horses. I truly did not believe that it was possible to talk about something that you love so passionately, so objectively, that it was possible to actually balance deep research with equally deep passion, and then talk about it in such a way that it's like watching a movie. I mean, watching you talk is like watching a movie. That's how vivid you make it. So thanks a lot for that, Yashaswini, and thank you, Rajiv, for being such an enthusiastic moderator. Thank you so much. I would now request our volunteers, Vishwaroop and Ketki, to present our author, Yashaswini Chandra, with a one-of-a-kind painting from Alag Angle community, made by Sumukh Kulkarni especially for today's session. The young students of this community make this painting on the basis of their unique interpretation of the book. We at VLF would like to express our thanks to our title sponsor, Elvishwaraj Environment Private Limited. We would like to express our gratitude to our sponsors, Calderis and SMS. We would also like to thank our partners, HelpLink, The Hitwad and Times of India, and AD Photography, Thinking Birds, Crossword, SA Digital Films, The Refuge, and Alag Angle for their support. Readers, I'm sure you enjoyed this session. Please feel free to interact with our author and buy her book right outside this room. You will get a 10% discount from Crossword and a further 100 rupees off from VLF. Thank you so much for coming and have a lovely weekend.